My phone, vibrating against the marble nightstand, shattered the quiet of my living room at exactly 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. I did not recognize the urgency until I saw my older sister's name flashing on the bright screen. Vanessa rarely called me, and she certainly never called before her morning Pilates session. I swiped to answer a knot forming in my stomach. "Hello. Sis, Dad died last night," Vanessa said. Her voice was not laced with tears or the heavy, suffocating weight of sudden grief. It was cold, practiced, and sharply efficient. "He left everything to me and my husband. You get absolutely nothing." Before I could even process the cruelty of her tone, a deep, arrogant chuckle echoed through the receiver. It was Bradley, my white brother-in-law. "Finally, the broke dropout is out of the picture." Brad sneered, his voice dripping with the kind of untouchable entitlement that always made my blood boil. "I have already called the demolition crew for the house in Cascade Heights. We are tearing that outdated junk down by Monday morning." I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of a hysterical breakdown. Instead, I simply pressed the speakerphone icon and set the device down on my custom Italian leather coffee table. My father, Marcus, who was sitting right beside me on the sofa, paused with his porcelain espresso cup halfway to his lips. He looked at the phone, then looked at me, a mixture of profound heartbreak and quiet fury, etching deep lines into his 68-year-old face. He leaned forward, cleared his throat, and spoke directly into the microphone. "You buried me a bit early, Vanessa," my father said, his baritone voice vibrating with a terrifying absolute calm. "And Brad, you touch one single brick of my house, and I will personally bury you." The dead silence on the other end of the line was the sweetest, most satisfying sound I had heard in my 33 years of life. "Dad," Vanessa's voice finally cracked, shattering her smug facade. The panic in her pitch was immediate and frantic. "Dad, the hospital. The doctor said your heart stopped. They told us you were gone. They said I had a mild allergic reaction to my new blood pressure medication." "Vanessa," my father replied, setting his espresso down with a sharp clink. "I woke up at 2 in the morning. The night nurses informed me that you and your husband had already ordered them to cease all life-prolonging measures and rushed out to make the necessary arrangements. My own flesh and blood tried to pull the plug on me." Growing up in Atlanta, our family was rooted in pride, resilience, and deep history. My father owned a sprawling, historic, multi-million-dollar estate in Cascade Heights, a neighborhood built on generations of Black excellence. Vanessa always desperately wanted to erase our roots. She married Brad, a sleazy, condescending real estate developer who looked at our family's cultural legacy and saw nothing but a tear-down opportunity for generic, overpriced luxury condos. To them, I was just Kiara, the nursing school dropout. When I left college at 21, Vanessa made absolutely sure the entire extended family knew I was a spectacular failure. What she did not know was that I had dropped out to start my own medical staffing agency, which I eventually scaled into an elite private healthcare and real estate investment empire. I never corrected her. I let her think I was still living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make rent every month. "Mr. Marcus, hold on. Let us just be reasonable here." Brad's voice suddenly cut through the speakerphone, smoothly sliding back into his typical corporate tone. I was recovering fast. There was obviously a massive medical miscommunication, but honestly, it does not actually matter if you are currently breathing or not. Because as of yesterday afternoon, while you were unconscious in that hospital bed, I officially activated the power of attorney you signed last year. The Cascade Heights property is already legally sold to my development firm. The bulldozers are still coming on Monday. Kiara, pack whatever cheap thrift store clothes you left in your childhood room and get out of my property. My father's hands began to shake. He had trusted Brad to help manage some complicated property taxes, not to steal the very home he had built from the ground up. I picked up the phone, feeling the cool metal against my palm. "Brad," I said, my voice silky, dangerous, and perfectly composed. "You might want to check the county deed records again. You cannot sell a house that does not belong to Dad anymore." "What the hell are you talking about, you idiot?" Vanessa snapped, her panic returning. "Dad's name is on the deed." "Not since last Tuesday," I replied, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my own coffee. When Dad first started feeling ill, we legally transferred the entire Cascade Heights estate into an irrevocable historic trust. The sole trustee, me. Your power of attorney is as useless as your husband's credit score. The only thing you sold to your firm, Brad, is a massive crippling lawsuit. You forged that, Brad yelled, his white savior complex completely shattering into a million pieces. The idea that a black woman he deemed a failure had outmaneuvered his legal team was too much for his fragile ego to handle. You manipulated a sick elderly black man. I am calling the police right now. Kiara, I am having you arrested for elder abuse, fraud, and kidnapping. You are going to rot in a jail cell. The line went dead. He had hung up. My father slumped back into the sofa cushions, a single tear escaping his eye. I raised a monster, he whispered, staring at the blank phone screen. You raised a survivor, Dad, I said softly, reaching out to hold his trembling hand. And today, we clean house. We will finally take back everything they stole from this family. Less than 40 minutes later, the violent pounding on my front door echoed through the grand foyer. The heavy brass knocker struck against the solid mahogany with an aggressive force that demanded immediate compliance. I smoothed the wrinkles from my silk trousers and walked slowly across the imported marble floor. When I pulled the heavy double doors open, the humid Atlanta morning air rushed in, bringing with it the exact nightmare I had anticipated. Brad and Vanessa stood on my porch, flanked by two uniformed police officers. Brad wore his tailored navy suit like a suit of armor. His posture radiated the kind of unchecked, arrogant confidence that only came from a lifetime of never being told no. Vanessa stood slightly behind him, her designer sunglasses pushed back onto her perfectly styled hair. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. That is her officers. That is my sister. She is the unstable dropout who kidnapped our father from the hospital. Brad stepped forward, physically blocking my view of the driveway. He looked at the two officers, lowering his voice into a calm, authoritative register designed to establish instant camaraderie and dominance. Gentlemen, this woman is deeply disturbed. She removed my father-in-law from a secure medical facility entirely against medical advice. I hold the legal power of attorney. I demand you go in there, secure the old man, and put her in handcuffs before she hurts him or herself. The lead officer, a stern-looking man with a graying mustache, rested his hand casually near his duty belt. He looked past me, his eyes scanning the 20-foot vaulted ceilings, the original Basquiat painting hanging above the sweeping staircase, and the sheer undeniable wealth radiating from every corner of my home. Ma'am, the officer said, his tone cautious but firm. We received a highly concerning report of elder endangerment. We need to step inside and see Mr. Marcus immediately. Also, we will need to speak to the actual homeowners about this disturbance. Vanessa let out a harsh, mocking laugh that bounced off the stone pillars of the porch. Homeowners, officers, she does not own this place. Look at her. She probably broke in here to hide him, or she is house-sitting for the people she cleans for. Kiara begged my father for rent money just 10 years ago because she failed out of nursing school. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the angry, defensive reaction they desperately needed to validate their narrative. Instead, I calmly walked over to the console table near the entrance, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thick embossed folder alongside my state identification card. I handed both directly to the lead officer. I do not clean houses for a living, Vanessa, I said, my voice perfectly level. I build them, just like I built the business that paid for the very wedding you used to drain Dad's retirement accounts 5 years ago. The officer opened the folder, his eyes darting between my identification and the certified property deed. His posture shifted instantly from authoritative suspicion to profound respect. My apologies, Ms. Kiara, the officer said, handing the documents back with a slight nod. We just need to verify that your father is safe. Brad's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The sudden realization that the sister-in-law he had belittled for over a decade secretly owned a $5 million mansion in Buckhead visibly short-circuited his brain. He lunged forward, pointing furiously at the open doorway. This is a ridiculous trick. She is a fraud. I demand you search the premises and find the hostage. Before the officers could even react to his outburst, The sound of confident footsteps echoed from the hallway. My father emerged from the sunroom, looking impeccably sharp in a fresh linen set. He held a ceramic cup in one hand and the morning newspaper in the other. He looked healthier and more lucid than he had in months. "I am not a hostage, officers," my father said, his booming voice commanding instant attention. He walked to my side and placed a steady protective hand on my shoulder. "I am at my youngest daughter's house, and I am in full possession of my mental faculties. My eldest daughter and her husband here tried to have me taken off life support yesterday so they could steal my historic property. I left the hospital voluntarily to seek safety." The officers turned to look at Brad, their expressions hardening. They realized they had been manipulated into acting as private muscle for a family dispute. "Sir, it sounds like your father-in-law is perfectly fine," the second officer said sharply. "We are leaving." Brad clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing into dark, hateful slits. He refused to lose. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, formal document stamped with a bright gold seal. "Officers, listen to the man. He is clearly delusional," Brad said, his voice slick with manufactured pity. "He actually thinks his broke daughter owns this mansion. I am his court-appointed legal guardian. I have the medical power of attorney, and this is an emergency psychiatric hold order signed by a judge and the chief of staff at Oak Ridge Medical Center." He shoved the document into the officer's chest. "I have a private ambulance waiting at the gate. You are legally required to let my medics transport him." The officer reviewed the signature, his face falling. His hands were legally tied. Dad looked at me, sheer terror finally breaking his composure. I looked at Brad's victorious, disgusting grin. He thought sending Dad to Oak Ridge Medical Center, an elite fortress-like facility, would lock me out forever. I smiled a slow, terrifying smile. "You are right, Brad. Oak Ridge is exactly what Dad needs." I turned to the officers. "I will follow them. I will see you there, Brad. Enjoy the ride while you still can. Because when you arrive, everything changes." The game was on. The flashing red lights of the private medical transport painted the towering oak trees of my neighborhood as the vehicle pulled out of my driveway. Brad's sleek gray Range Rover aggressively tailed the emergency ambulance, riding its rear bumper like he was leading a royal procession of conquest. I walked at a measured, deliberate pace toward my garage, the cool metal of my keys resting securely in the palm of my hand. The engine of my midnight black Maybach purred to life with a quiet, dominant hum that perfectly matched my mood. I pulled out past the massive iron gates of my community and settled into the lane right behind Brad. I did not speed. I did not tailgate. I drove with the absolute precision of a woman who knew exactly how this entire day was going to end. The drive to Oak Ridge Medical Center took exactly 45 minutes through the winding, manicured roads of the city. Oak Ridge was not your standard public hospital. It was a sprawling, ultra-luxury medical campus designed exclusively for politicians, elite athletes, and wealthy executives who demanded absolute privacy. The pristine grounds looked more like a five-star resort than a healthcare facility, complete with cascading water fountains, valet parking, and an imposing glass facade that gleamed brilliantly in the late morning sun. Brad practically threw his keys at the valet attendant before storming toward the back doors of the ambulance. I handed my keys to a different attendant, offering a polite, calm smile, and walked slowly toward the grand entrance. By the time I reached the automatic sliding doors, Brad was already dragging my father by the arm into the expansive marble-floored lobby. My father played his part flawlessly. He kept his head slightly bowed and his steps hesitant, letting Brad believe he was firmly in control of the situation. Vanessa clicked her designer heels furiously across the polished stone floor, her expensive handbag swinging wildly from her shoulder. She looked absolutely frantic, and it had absolutely nothing to do with our father's supposed medical emergency. "I need him secured in the psychiatric ward immediately," Brad barked at the front desk receptionist. He slammed his golden-sealed psychiatric hold order onto the pristine granite counter with unnecessary force. "I am Bradley Vance, CEO of Vance Developments. I hold the medical power of attorney," This man is suffering from a severe violent psychotic break. The young receptionist, wearing crisp, dark blue medical scrubs, looked terrified by the sudden shouting. She glanced down at the official paperwork, then back up at Brad's reddening face. Sir, I need to process the initial intake forms first. We cannot just lock a patient away without a preliminary evaluation from our staff. Process the paperwork while he is locked up, Vanessa shrieked, completely ignoring the stares of the wealthy patrons seated in the plush waiting area. She turned her venomous glare toward me as I calmly approached the desk. My sister here is trying to illegally interfere with family business. She just stole my entire inheritance. Dad was supposed to leave the Cascade Heights property to me. I already promised the land to Brad for his new condo development, and she ruined it. She ruined my money. There it was. The ugly, unfiltered truth spilled out into the open lobby for everyone to hear. Vanessa did not care about our father's heart, his blood pressure, or his mental state. She only cared about the millions of dollars she thought she was inherently entitled to. She had married a man who wanted to bulldoze our family history, and she was furious that I had ripped the deed right out of their greedy, grasping hands. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," the receptionist pleaded, her hands shaking as she typed quickly on her computer keyboard. Oak Ridge requires a mandatory $10,000 admission deposit for any emergency psychiatric hold before a patient can be moved upstairs to the secure floor. Brad let out a harsh, cruel bark of laughter. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at me as if I were a piece of trash stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather shoes. "Did you hear that, Kiara? $10,000? I highly doubt you have that kind of cash hiding under the mattress in your little maid's quarters." He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with unmistakable venom and racial prejudice. "Goodbye, Kiara. Have fun taking the public bus back to whatever hole you actually live in. The adults are handling real family business now. Call security and have her thrown out of here right now." Two burly security guards immediately stepped away from their posts near the elevators and began walking purposefully toward us. Brad puffed out his chest, completely reveling in the power trip. He was a wealthy white man standing inside a luxury hospital, and he fully expected the world to bend to his will and crush the black woman standing in his way. "Security!" I finally spoke, my voice echoing clearly and firmly through the quiet, cavernous lobby. "Please escort Mr. Vance and my sister out of my building." Brad threw his head back and laughed again, a loud grating sound that vibrated off the walls. "Your building? Are you having a psychotic break too? You really are as delusional as the old man." Suddenly, the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive administrative suite swung open with a violent crash. The chief medical director of Oak Ridge, Dr. Harrison, rushed out into the lobby. He was a distinguished man in his late 50s, flanked by a team of 3 senior administrators carrying digital tablets. They practically sprinted across the marble floor, completely bypassing the security guards, bypassing Vanessa, and completely ignoring Brad. Dr. Harrison stopped directly in front of me. He did not ask for my identification. He did not question why I was there. Instead, the chief medical director bowed his head respectfully, saying, "We have been waiting for you." Dr. Harrison stood tall, his hands clasped neatly together in front of his crisp white lab coat. Brad's mouth hung open, his face a mask of absolute bewilderment. He looked at the chief medical director, then at me, unable to process the shifting power dynamic. "Wait, what do you mean you have been waiting for her?" Brad demanded, his voice cracking with rage. "Dr. Harrison, this woman is an unstable nursing school dropout. She cleans bedpans for a living. I am the one who called ahead to reserve a room. I am the CEO of Vance Developments. You should be rolling out the red carpet for me." Dr. Harrison slowly turned to look at Brad. His expression was completely devoid of the deferential warmth he had just shown me. He looked at my arrogant white brother-in-law as if he were a stain on the marble floor. "Mr. Vance, I am well aware of who you are," Dr. Harrison said, his tone icy and precise. "But I am also intimately aware of who this remarkable woman is. This is Ms. Kiara Marcus. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Health Holdings. Last month, Apex finalized a comprehensive corporate acquisition of the entire Oak Ridge medical network. Ms. Marcus does not clean bedpans. She signs my paychecks and she outright owns this hospital. You are standing in her lobby." Vanessa gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The sheer, unadulterated horror washing over my sister's face was an absolute masterpiece. For over a decade, she had paraded proudly around family barbecues wearing her marriage to a wealthy real estate developer like a royal crown, constantly reminding everyone that I was the ultimate family failure. Now the undeniable truth was staring her right in the face. "That is impossible," Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted glass ceilings. "She is broke. She begged Dad for rent money. She is nothing but a pathological liar." "The only liar here is you, Vanessa," I said, stepping confidently past Dr. Harrison to look my sister dead in the eye. "I let you believe your own toxic narrative because it kept your greedy, grasping hands out of my legitimate business affairs. While you were busy marrying a man who wants to bulldoze our rich family legacy just to build gentrified coffee shops, I was building a $1 billion healthcare portfolio. You sold your soul for a luxury handbag. I bought the hospital." I turned my attention back to the security guards who were still hovering uncertainly nearby. I gave them a sharp, authoritative nod. "Gentlemen, as the primary stakeholder of this facility, I am officially revoking Mr. Vance's visitation privileges," I instructed smoothly. Furthermore, the medical power of attorney he presented was obtained under fraudulent pretenses and is completely nullified by the irrevocable trust I established. These two individuals are now officially trespassing. Escort them off my property immediately. If they resist, call the Atlanta Police Department and press formal charges for criminal harassment. Brad's face turned a violent shade of purple. His white privilege, his corporate title, and his aggressive intimidation tactics had all been completely neutralized in a matter of seconds. He lunged forward, but the two burly security guards intercepted him instantly, grabbing him by his tailored arms and twisting them firmly behind his back. "Get your hands off me!" Brad roared, struggling wildly against the guard's iron grip. "Do you have any idea who I am? I will sue this entire hospital into the ground. I will completely ruin you." "You are already ruined, Brad," I replied, crossing my arms. "You just do not know it yet." Vanessa started screaming, her designer heels slipping clumsily on the polished floor as a female security officer grabbed her elbow to safely guide her out. Dad, tell them to stop. Tell her to leave us alone," she wailed suddenly, pretending to care deeply about the father she had tried to legally murder just 12 short hours earlier. My father simply turned his broad back to her. He looked directly at Dr. Harrison and offered a warm, dignified smile. "Doctor, it has been a very long, exhausting morning. I believe you mentioned something about a private suite." "Right away, Mr. Marcus," Dr. Harrison said, gesturing politely toward the private VIP elevators. "We have the presidential suite fully prepped for you on the top floor. A team of our absolute best cardiologists is waiting to give you a complete complimentary medical workup. We will ensure you are comfortable, perfectly safe, and completely undisturbed by outside noise." I watched my father walk toward the elevators, his posture straight and proud. He had survived their treacherous plot, and now he was going to be treated like absolute royalty in a premium facility his own daughter owned. Meanwhile, the scene at the front entrance was rapidly descending into absolute chaos. Brad was kicking and violently cursing, his polished corporate veneer completely stripped away, revealing the desperate, malicious coward he truly was beneath the surface. The automatic sliding glass doors parted, and a blast of hot Georgia air swept into the cool, air-conditioned lobby. "You think you have won," Brad screamed, digging his expensive leather shoes into the textured floor mat to violently resist the guards pushing him outside. "You actually think buying a stupid hospital makes you untouchable, Kiara? You really think you saved the old man today?" I walked slowly toward the main exit, stopping just inside the glass doors. I wanted to see the exact moment they were physically thrown out onto the hot pavement. "I know I won, Brad," I stated firmly. Brad let out a harsh, breathless, maniacal laugh. He thrashed violently against the guards, his eyes wild with a sudden, spiteful triumph. "You are far too late. You think I only wanted that crumbling house. I had his power of attorney for an entire week while he was stuck in a coma. I liquidated everything. His entire savings is gone." Brad's spit flew as he screamed. Security shoved him through the automatic doors. He stumbled onto the hot pavement, Vanessa wailing behind him. I did not let his hollow threats rattle me. Brad thought he dealt a fatal blow, but he played checkers while I moved chess pieces across a board he could not comprehend. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and walked straight to the VIP elevator. Dr. Harrison was waiting inside with my father. I kissed my dad, assuring him he was safe. I had a bank to dismantle. I marched out. The private exit slid into my Maybach and instructed my driver to take me to the downtown headquarters of First Heritage Bank. This was where my father loyally kept his life savings retirement funds and liquid assets for the Cascade Heights estate for over 40 years. I strode through the revolving doors, my heels clicking sharply against the polished terrazzo floor. I bypassed the line and walked straight up to the mahogany desk of the branch manager, Richard Sterling. Richard had always been overly friendly to Brad, chuckling at his crude jokes. Today he would learn a very hard lesson. "Mr. Sterling," I said, slamming my custom leather portfolio onto his pristine desk, "I need you to immediately freeze all outgoing wire transfers from Marcus Hayes' primary accounts. There has been a fraudulent authorization using a revoked power of attorney." Richard looked up from his monitors. He offered a tight smile, radiating bureaucratic smugness. "Miss Chiara, it is nice to see you. However, I cannot process that request. Mr. Vance came in yesterday afternoon with a fully executed and notarized power of attorney. He authorized a complete asset liquidation and requested a wire transfer to his corporate account. The paperwork was immaculate. Our hands are legally tied. You understand how corporate policy works, right?" He spoke slowly, enunciating his words as if explaining basic math to a toddler. He was stonewalling me, playing the loyal corporate soldier for a white developer who likely promised him a lucrative kickback. "That power of attorney was automatically voided the moment I established my father irrevocable historic trust," I countered. "I am presenting you with the legal trust documents right now. If you allow those funds to clear, you will be held personally liable for facilitating elder financial abuse." Richard let out a patronizing sigh. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, crossing his arms. "Look, Chiara, I know this family drama is highly emotional for you, but Brad is a respected developer. He brings millions of dollars through these doors. I am not going to halt a major corporate wire transfer just because you are upset about your inheritance. I suggest you go home and let the lawyers handle this. There is absolutely nothing you can do here." I did not argue with him. Arguing with a middle manager was a waste of breath. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out my smartphone, and bypassed his entire chain of command. 10 years ago, when I was struggling to launch my medical staffing agency, men like Richard would have intimidated me. But navigating the cutthroat world of private healthcare investment had taught me exactly how to leverage power. I dialed an unlisted number. It was picked up on the second ring. "Chiara, my favorite lifesaver," the booming voice of Jonathan Reed, the regional vice president of First Heritage Bank, echoed through the speaker. "Please tell me you are calling with good news about my mother's physical therapy schedule at the new facility." Richard's smug expression instantly vanished. The color drained from his face as he recognized the voice of his ultimate superior. "Your mother is doing beautifully, Jonathan. She is walking unassisted today," I said smoothly, never breaking eye contact with Richard. "But I am actually calling because I have a massive problem at your downtown branch. A man named Brad Vance used a fraudulent power of attorney to attempt a liquidation of my father's life savings. Your branch manager, Richard Sterling, is currently refusing to halt the pending wire transfer, despite me presenting him with the legal trust documents." "Put me on speaker," Jonathan barked, his friendly demeanor vanishing. I placed the phone on the desk. "You are on speaker, Jonathan." "Sterling." Jonathan's voice cracked like a whip through the quiet bank branch. "You will immediately halt every single transaction associated with Marcus Hayes. You will freeze Brad Vance's accounts pending a fraud investigation. If a single dime leaves that account, you can pack up your desk and consider your career in finance completely over." Richard's hands shook as he scrambled across his keyboard, frantically typing to cancel the pending wire transfer. The arrogant smirk that had plastered his face just moments before was entirely gone, replaced by the sheer terror of a man watching his livelihood evaporate. He hit the enter key and spun his monitor around to show me the screen. The transfer was officially blocked. My father's life savings were safe. "It is done, Mr. Reed," Richard stammered into the phone, sweat beading on his forehead. "The funds are secure." "Good," Jonathan replied, breathing heavily. Kiara, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You just dodged a massive bullet and you have no idea how deep this actually goes. I just pulled up the internal risk management file on Brad Vance's corporate accounts. He did not try to steal your father money just to be greedy. I frowned, picking up the phone and taking it off speaker. What do you mean, Jonathan? Brad firm is drowning in toxic debt. Jonathan revealed, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. His development project went belly up last quarter. He is virtually bankrupt. But that is not even the worst part. Our compliance division flagged his accounts 3 days ago. Brad Vance is under an active federal investigation for massive wire fraud and embezzlement. He was trying to use the stolen money to flee. The revelation hung heavy in the sterile air of the bank branch. I stared at Richard, whose face was completely devoid of color. He had almost become an accessory to a federal crime, blinded by the very privilege Brad wielded like a weapon. I thanked Jonathan, ended the call, and walked out of the bank with my head held high. Brad was not just a greedy, entitled son-in-law operating with complete impunity. He was a desperate, dangerously cornered animal. I slid into the back of my Maybach and instructed my driver to take me to the corporate headquarters of Apex Health Holdings. It was time to permanently switch my strategy from playing defense to executing brutal offense. My office occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. Walking through the polished chrome and black marble lobby usually brought me a deep sense of peace. Today, however, my executive assistant Maya met me at the elevator banks with a highly distressed expression. She held a clipboard tightly against her chest, glancing nervously toward the frosted glass doors of my primary boardroom. Ms. Kiara, I tried to stop them, Maya whispered, her professional composure fracturing. Your sister bypassed the main reception desk by claiming it was a medical emergency regarding your father. She brought 3 other people with her. They are sitting in the boardroom right now, demanding to see you immediately. I can call security to have them escorted out. No, I replied, smoothing the lapels of my silk blazer. Let them stay. I will handle this. I pushed open the heavy wooden boardroom doors. Sitting around my custom 12-foot walnut conference table was a tribunal of my family's most toxic judges. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. Flanking her were my Aunt Shirley and Uncle Thomas, the loudest and most judgmental elders in our entire extended family. They had spent decades treating Vanessa like royalty, while treating my very existence as a cautionary tale. There she is! Aunt Shirley snapped the moment I walked in. She crossed her arms over her floral blouse, glaring at me with the same deep disappointment she had weaponized against me since childhood. Kiara, what is wrong with you? Vanessa called us, crying hysterically. She said you dragged your sick father out of his hospital bed and forced him to sign his historic property over to you. Have you completely lost your mind? I walked slowly to the head of the table, forcing Vanessa to scoot her chair back to make room for me. Aunt Shirley, Dad transferred the property into a trust to protect it from Brad. Brad tried to sell the land while Dad was in a coma. Uncle Thomas scoffed loudly, slamming his hand on the polished wood. Do not lie to us, Kiara. Brad is a highly successful real estate developer. He is a good, wealthy man who has provided beautifully for your sister. Why would he need to steal from his father-in-law? You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of Vanessa. She married well and you dropped out of nursing school to chase pipe dreams. Now you are trying to scam your way into the family inheritance. Vanessa sniffled, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I just want Dad to be safe, Uncle Thomas. Kiara is unstable. She bought this fake office space just to pretend she is successful. She is trying to ruin my marriage and bankrupt Brad out of pure spite. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost impressive. My family had been conditioned for 33 years to believe that white proximity equaled success. They blindly trusted Brad's tailored suits and country club memberships over the undeniable reality of my corporate empire surrounding them. Aunt Shirley pointed a rigid finger at me, her voice dripping with decades of unchecked bias. You will fix this today, Kiara, Shirley demanded. You will march down to the courthouse, dissolve this ridiculous trust, and sign the property rights back over to Brad. He knows how to manage money. You do not. Stop acting like a rebellious child, and do what is right for your sister's family. before you send your father to an early grave with all this unnecessary stress. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply walked over to the built-in mahogany credenza, opened the secure file drawer, and pulled out a stack of pristine white papers. I had instructed my private investigator to pull these specific communication logs the moment Dad's health started rapidly declining last month. I calmly walked around the long table, placing a stapled packet face down in front of Aunt Shirley, Uncle Thomas, and finally Vanessa. Vanessa looked down at the packet, her fake tears instantly drying up. Her manicured hands began to tremble. "Since we are talking about what is best for Dad," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive room, "I think you should read the second page aloud, Uncle Thomas. It is a text message exchange from last Thursday between Vanessa and her husband." Uncle Thomas frowned, picking up the packet. He flipped to the second page and adjusted his reading glasses. He began to read aloud, his voice starting strong but quickly faltering. "Brad says if the old man does not wake up by Friday, we pull the plug. The Cascade Heights land is worth $4 million to the new buyers. Vanessa replies, fine, but if he wakes up, we cannot afford to keep him in a nice place. Let us stick him in that state-run facility in Macon. The cheap one. We can take his savings, sell the land, and move to the Cayman Islands before the feds catch you." The boardroom descended into a suffocating absolute silence. Aunt Shirley gasped, dropping the papers onto the table as if they had physically burned her. She looked at Vanessa, her expression shifting from righteous indignation to pure, unadulterated horror. "Vanessa," Aunt Shirley whispered, her voice shaking violently, "you were going to dump your own father in a substandard state facility just to steal his land." Vanessa's face drained of all color. She stared at the damning printed words, unable to formulate a single cohesive lie to save herself. The thick, suffocating silence in the boardroom marked the absolute destruction of her pristine, untouchable golden child facade. She was finally completely exposed. The ultimate betrayal she planned was now permanently cemented into our family history. She had destroyed her legacy forever. Vanessa sat frozen in her plush leather chair, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. For the first time in her 35 years of life, her tears failed to manipulate the people in the room. Uncle Thomas slowly pushed the printed text messages away from him, as if the paper itself were diseased. He looked at Vanessa with a mixture of profound disgust and disbelief. Aunt Shirley shook her head, muttering under her breath about how pride comes before the fall. Sensing that she had entirely lost the moral high ground, Vanessa did what she always did when cornered. She pivoted to aggression. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly. If she could not steal the Cascade Heights property, she was going to demand something else of immense value. "Fine," Vanessa snapped, her voice losing all its previous sugary sweetness. "You want to play the savior, Kiara. You want to act like you are the sole protector of this family. Then give me my ring. I am leaving, and I am taking what rightfully belongs to me." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the edge of the mahogany credenza. "What ring are you talking about, Vanessa? Do not play stupid with me," she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Mom's heirloom diamond ring. The 3-carat vintage platinum ring that has been in our family for 4 generations. Dad always promised it to me because I am the eldest daughter. I want it right now." Her demand echoed off the glass walls of my boardroom. It was a classic Vanessa tactic. Whenever we were children and I received praise for a good grade or a science fair ribbon, she would immediately throw a massive ear-piercing tantrum until our parents bought her a new toy just to keep the peace. She screamed until people caved. She weaponized her emotions to exhaust everyone around her into submission. Even now, as a grown woman facing the undeniable proof of her own treachery, she reverted to acting like a spoiled toddler denied a piece of candy. "Dad never promised you that ring," I said calmly. "Mom explicitly stated in her journal that the ring was to be kept in the family trust until one of us had a daughter to pass it down to. You do not have a daughter, Vanessa. And considering you just plotted to dump the man who guards that trust into a substandard state facility, you have lost all privileges to demand anything." "I am the eldest!" Vanessa shrieked, stomping her foot on the floor, her face flushed an angry, blotchy red. "I am the successful one. I am the one who married a wealthy man and elevated this family's social standing. You are just a dropout who got lucky with a few business investments." That ring is my birthright, and I am not leaving this building until you hand it over. Aunt Shirley tried to intervene, raising her hands in a placating gesture. Vanessa, calm down. This is not the time to fight over jewelry. You need to explain these text messages about your father. Shut up, Aunt Shirley! Vanessa screamed, completely losing her grip on reality. I do not have to explain anything to anyone. Brad and I deserve compensation for dealing with this family. If Kiara is holding the assets hostage, I demand the jewelry. Dad keeps the portable combination safe in his bedroom closet. I know you moved it, Kiara. I know you brought it here when you transferred the property deed. Open it right now. She was incredibly perceptive when it came to tracking valuables. When my father first fell ill, I had immediately hired a private security firm to transport his portable steel safe from his Cascade Heights estate directly to my corporate office. I knew Brad would eventually try to rummage through my father's personal belongings, and I wanted to ensure our family heirlooms and critical legal documents were locked away behind biometric security. I looked at Vanessa's desperate, flushed face. I could easily have my security team drag her out of the building right then and there. But I wanted Aunt Shirley and Uncle Thomas to witness exactly how empty her demands truly were. I wanted to put the final nail in the coffin of her golden child narrative. You want to see the ring? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Fine. Let us look at your precious inheritance. I walked over to the corner of the boardroom, where a heavy reinforced steel safe sat bolted to the floor beneath a modern art sculpture. I knelt down, entered the complex 8-digit passcode, and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open with a smooth, silent glide. I reached into the dark interior of the safe and pulled out the faded black velvet box that had protected our mother's ring for decades. I stood up and walked slowly back to the conference table, placing the small box directly in front of Vanessa. Her eyes widened with naked greed. She snatched the box from the table, her fingers trembling with anticipation as she popped the lid open. Vanessa gasped, but it was not a gasp of joy. The velvet interior was completely empty. The 3-carat vintage platinum diamond was gone. Where is it? Vanessa shrieked, frantically shaking the empty box as if the massive diamond might magically fall out. You stole it. You stole my ring, Kiara. I did not steal anything, I replied, staring down at a folded yellow slip of paper resting at the bottom of the safe. I reached past her, picking up the yellow paper. I unfolded it, reading the printed ink. My blood ran completely cold. But someone else certainly did. I slammed the paper onto the table. It was an official pawn shop receipt. The signature at the bottom did not belong to my father. It belonged to Brad. I stared at the crumpled yellow receipt resting on the polished walnut table. The ink was faded, but the bold, arrogant signature across the bottom line was unmistakably his. He had not just planned to steal the land. He had already begun pawning off our family legacy piece by precious piece. Vanessa lunged across the table to snatch the paper, but I pulled it back swiftly, folding it into the pocket of my blazer. I did not waste another second looking at my sister or my stunned aunt and uncle. I turned on my heel and walked straight out of the boardroom. Maya was waiting by the elevators with my coat. I told her to cancel my afternoon meetings and send a message to my private security team. The address on the receipt belonged to a notorious shady pawn shop on the edge of the city limits, an area known for quick, unquestioned cash transactions. The drive to the pawn shop took 30 minutes, pulling me far away from the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta into a neighborhood dominated by barred windows and flickering neon signs. My driver parked the Maybach across the street from a dilapidated brick building with a faded sign that read Gold Exchange. The contrast between my luxury vehicle and the crumbling sidewalk was stark, but I did not care. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my blazer, and crossed the cracked asphalt. As I pushed open the heavy glass door, a rusty bell chimed overhead. The interior smelled of old dust, cheap metal, and desperation. Glass display cases lined the walls, filled with discarded electronics, tarnished watches, and questionable jewelry. And standing right at the front counter, arguing loudly with a burly clerk, was Brad. I told you these are authentic vintage silver serving trays, Brad snapped, slamming his hand down on the scratched glass counter. They belong to my father. I have the legal right to sell them. Give me 5,000 cash right now, or I am walking out of here and taking my business somewhere else. The clerk, an older man with a thick beard and tattooed arms, simply crossed his arms and chewed on a toothpick. He looked completely unimpressed by the tailored suit and demanding tone of the man before him. I walked slowly up behind Brad, recognizing the ornate silver trays instantly. They had sat in the dining room of the Cascade Heights estate for my entire childhood. My grandmother used them every Thanksgiving. Brad was pawning our family history for quick cash to cover his failing business debts. The serving trays are not yours to sell, Brad, I said, my voice cutting through the stuffy air of the pawn shop. Brad spun around, his eyes widening in shock before quickly narrowing into a glare of absolute hatred. He took a step toward me, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. Are you stalking me now, Kiara? Have you completely lost your mind? He demanded. He puffed out his chest, stepping into my personal space, trying to use his height and physical presence to intimidate me. This was his classic tactic. Whenever he felt cornered, he used his size and his status to force people into submission. You need to turn around and walk out of this store before things get very ugly for you. I did not step back. I held my ground, staring directly into his furious eyes. You stole the platinum diamond ring that belonged to my mother, I stated clearly. You broke into the safe, took a priceless family heirloom and pawned it here for cash. And now you are trying to sell the silver that belonged to my grandmother. You are a common thief dressed in a corporate suit. Brad let out a cruel, condescending laugh. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged. I am the legal executor of that estate, you ignorant dropout. I can sell whatever I want, and who is going to stop me? You are nothing but a glorified nurse who got lucky. I am a wealthy developer. The police will always believe me over you. Now get out of my face before I make you regret walking in here. He reached out to forcefully shove my shoulder. Before his fingers could even graze the fabric of my blazer, a massive hand clamped down on his wrist with the force of a steel vise. Brad gasped in sudden pain, twisting his head to see where the grip had come from. Two men in immaculate black suits had silently stepped out of the shadows near the entrance of the shop. They were my private security detail, highly trained professionals who had followed my car and entered the store just moments behind me. The guard holding the wrist applied a fraction more pressure, forcing Brad to his knees right there on the dirty linoleum floor. The second guard stepped between me and Brad, creating an impenetrable human barrier. Do not ever attempt to touch me again, I said, looking down at Brad as he winced in pain. I turned my attention to the clerk behind the counter, who was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Sir, my name is Kiara Marcus. The man currently kneeling on your floor stole a massive vintage platinum diamond ring from my family and pawned it here recently. He is also attempting to sell stolen silver trays. I want the ring back. The clerk swallowed hard, nervously pulling the toothpick from his mouth. Ma'am, I bought that ring fair and square. He showed me identification. If you want it back, you have to pay the ticket price. I did not argue with him. I pulled out a solid black credit card, placing it firmly on the counter. Brad stared, completely terrified by my undeniable wealth. I am buying the ring, the silver, and your entire shop inventory. Run the card right now, hand me the ring. The clerk stared at my solid black card, then down at Brad, who was still pinned to the linoleum floor by my security team. The clerk picked up the card and swiped it. The terminal beeped approval. He hastily bagged the silver trays and slid the velvet box across the glass counter. I picked up the box, popped it open to verify the platinum diamond was safely inside, and snapped it shut. Release him, I ordered my guards. They stepped back simultaneously. Brad scrambled to his feet. His face was twisted in absolute fury. You think you can just buy your way out of everything, he spat, backing toward the exit. I am hosting the City Development Gala tonight. I am pitching the Cascade Heights demolition to the largest investors in the state. You cannot stop progress, Kiara. He pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming, as he fled into the afternoon heat. I turned to my lead security guard. Ensure these items are transported directly to my father's secure vault, I instructed. I walked back to my Maybach with a newfound sense of clarity. Brad was desperate enough to pawn family heirlooms, which meant tonight's gala was his final frantic attempt to secure funding before his company collapsed. I intended to be front and center for his downfall. 3 hours later, I stepped out of my vehicle in front of the Grand Piedmont Hotel. I wore a crimson evening gown that commanded immediate attention. The valet opened the heavy brass doors, ushering me into a ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with Atlanta's corporate elite. Brad spared no expense for this event, using his company's dwindling credit to fund the open bars and floral arrangements. I walked past the check-in desk, ignoring the hostess who tried to ask for my invitation. I had not been invited by Brad or my sister, but I did not need an invitation. I purchased the Platinum Tier VIP table under the name of my holding company earlier that afternoon. My table was positioned directly in front of the main stage. I took my seat, signaling a waiter for water. Vanessa was fluttering around the room in a sequined dress, attempting to network with the wives of prominent city officials. When she spotted me sitting at the center table, the champagne glass nearly slipped from her manicured fingers. She grabbed Brad by the arm and pointed in my direction. He turned, his smile faltering instantly. He marched toward my table, his face tight with barely contained panic. "You are not welcome here," Brad hissed through gritted teeth, leaning over my table so the other guests would not hear. "Security is going to drag you out." "I paid $50,000 for this table, Brad," I replied, taking a slow sip of water. "I am a platinum sponsor. If you cause a scene, your investors will wonder why you are ejecting your biggest donor." He swallowed hard, realizing he was trapped. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, signaling the start of the presentation. Brad sprinted back to the stage, adjusting his tie and pasting on a bright, artificial smile. He tapped the microphone and looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and several prominent Black community leaders he had invited to secure local zoning approval. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Brad began, his voice projecting the slick, polished charm of a seasoned salesman. "Tonight we are here to discuss the future of Atlanta. We are here to talk about urban revitalization." A massive projector screen behind him illuminated with a digital rendering of modern, sterile luxury condominiums built right over my father's historic neighborhood. "Cascade Heights has a rich history, but we must look forward." Brad continued, speaking with incredible condescension to the community leaders sitting in the front row. "We are bringing progress to a blighted area. We are elevating the community by introducing premium retail spaces and high-end living. We are replacing the tired structures with innovation." He used corporate buzzwords to mask his underlying greed. He stood on that stage, a wealthy white developer, telling a room full of Black leaders that their history was nothing but an obstacle standing in the way of his profit margins. He was erasing our legacy and calling it a favor. "With your investment tonight, Vance Developments will break ground on this historic project by next week," Brad declared proudly. "We are opening the floor for initial capital commitments." I did not wait for the applause to begin. I stood up from my VIP table, the crimson fabric of my gown catching the stage lights. I picked up the secondary microphone resting on my table, which was reserved for major sponsors to ask questions. I flicked the switch and my voice boomed through the massive ballroom speakers, silencing the entire crowd. "Mr. Vance," I said clearly, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "You speak eloquently about revitalization, but you are omitting a crucial piece of financial information from your pitch to these esteemed investors." The room fell dead silent. The community leaders turned to look at me. "Who is this woman?" someone murmured. "Your firm, Vance Developments, is currently under active federal investigation for wire fraud," I announced, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the truth. "You are functionally bankrupt. You have defaulted on your last 3 commercial leases, and you do not possess the legal deed to the Cascade Heights property. You are standing on this stage attempting to solicit millions of dollars for land you do not own." Brad gripped the edges of the wooden podium, his face draining of all color. "Turn her microphone off!" he screamed frantically at the sound technician. I walked straight toward the edge of the stage. Do not bother adjusting the sound, I commanded, because I am the CEO of Apex Health Holdings, and I am outbidding your entire fraudulent development project in cash right here, right now. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps, hurried whispers, and the scraping of chairs. The wealthy investors Brad had meticulously courted over expensive dinners and private golf rounds were now actively backing away from his tables. A few of the prominent Black community leaders sitting in the front row crossed their arms, nodding in quiet approval as they watched the arrogant developer unravel on stage. Brad gripped the edges of the wooden podium so tightly his knuckles turned a stark, translucent white. He looked out at the sea of withdrawing checkbooks and realized his entire corporate facade had been annihilated in less than 60 seconds. He was losing everything. But men like Brad, men who had navigated their entire lives wielding white privilege as an impenetrable shield, never surrendered gracefully. They always believed they possessed a divine right to win, no matter how many lies they had to fabricate to secure the victory. Brad unbuttoned his suit jacket, his chest heaving as he abandoned his polished corporate persona. He marched away from the podium and grabbed a thick leather briefcase resting near the sound technician's booth. He snapped the golden latches open with frantic, trembling hands and pulled out a yellowed, legal-sized document encased in a protective plastic sleeve. He held it high above his head, turning back to face the restless crowd and the remaining investors who were lingering near the exits. "You think cash is going to save you, Kiara?" Brad shouted, his voice cracking with desperate, venomous energy. He did not even bother using the microphone. "You cannot outbid me for a property that I already legally own. You want to talk about fraud? Your father is the real fraud. He sold me the exact commercial rights to the entire Cascade Heights neighborhood 3 years ago. I have the original notarized deed right here." Vanessa, who had been hiding near the dessert buffet, suddenly perked up. She rushed toward the edge of the stage, her high heels clicking loudly, suddenly emboldened by her husband's apparent final lifeline. "That is right," she yelled to the crowd, pointing a shaking finger at me. "My father was going broke. Brad bailed him out and Dad signed the land over to Vance Developments as collateral. Kiara's stupid trust fund is completely invalid because Dad did not even own the land when he created it." The investors paused, their murmurs growing louder. Real estate law was absolute. If Brad truly held a valid, backdated deed, predating my irrevocable historic trust, my entire legal maneuver would be immediately tied up in a decades-long probate battle, effectively bankrupting the trust through legal fees. Brad sneered, waving the document like a victorious flag. He beckoned for the city's zoning commissioner, who was sitting at a nearby table, to come verify the paperwork. I did not panic. I simply stepped onto the first stair of the stage, my crimson gown sweeping elegantly against the carpet. I walked directly up to Brad, holding out my hand. "Let me see it," I demanded, my tone flat and uncompromising. Brad let out a harsh, condescending bark of laughter. He handed the plastic sleeve over, his eyes practically glowing with malicious triumph. "Read it and weep, you uneducated dropout. It has Marcus Hayes's signature, my corporate seal, and a certified city notary stamp, dated exactly 36 months ago. It is bulletproof. The bulldozers are still coming on Monday, and I am going to make you watch them tear your childhood home into dust." I held the document up to the bright stage lights. I did not just read the text, I dissected it. When I built Apex Health Holdings from the ground up, I spent 7 grueling years personally reviewing thousands of complex commercial real estate acquisitions, medical zoning permits, and facility deeds. I knew the intricate, unforgiving language of property law better than most seasoned corporate attorneys in Atlanta. I scanned my father's signature. It was a remarkably good forgery, likely traced from old tax returns Vanessa had stolen from his home office. The legal jargon was dense and deliberately confusing, designed to overwhelm anyone who did not understand complex property rights. Then my eyes locked onto the circular blue ink of the official notary stamp pressed firmly next to the forged signatures. I stared at the embossed seal, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Brad had made a fatal, amateurish mistake, one born of pure arrogance and rushed desperation. "You really should have paid closer attention to the fine print, Brad," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the silent ballroom. I held the document up so the zoning commissioner could see it. This document is allegedly signed and notarized 36 months ago. However, the state of Georgia updated its mandatory notary seal design exactly 14 months ago to include a unique microprinted state emblem to prevent this exact type of corporate fraud. This stamp contains the new microprinting. It is physically impossible for this seal to have been used 3 years ago. Brad's face drained of all color. He snatched the document out of my hands, staring frantically at the blue ink as if he could magically change its design by sheer willpower. "That is a clerical error," Brad stammered, sweat beading rapidly along his hairline. "The notary just updated his stamp early. It is still a legally binding contract." "It is a felony forgery," I corrected him sharply, stepping closer until he was forced to back up against the wooden podium. "And I know exactly who helped you commit this crime. I recognize this specific notary identification number." I pulled my smartphone from my clutch, pulling up a digital financial ledger. I turned the screen toward Brad, watching the absolute horror consume his features. "This stamp belongs to Alderman Douglas Preston," I announced, my voice slicing through the tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "A corrupt city official who rubber stamps fraudulent zoning permits for desperate developers like you. And unfortunately for both of you, Alderman Preston currently owes my private investment firm $4 million in defaulted commercial loans. I practically own him." The sun baked the manicured greens of the Peachtree Elite Country Club. I bypassed the valet, tossing my keys to an attendant, and walked through the heavy oak doors. This was a place where old Southern money hid to make deals over scotch. A hostess asked for my membership card. I simply handed her a crisp $100 bill and walked out onto the veranda. Alderman Douglas Preston sat alone at a wrought iron patio table. He wore an overpriced pastel polo shirt, casually slicing into his Eggs Benedict. He was the kind of man who signed away black neighborhoods for campaign donations from developers like Brad. I pulled out the chair directly across from him and sat down. The metal scraped harshly against the stone. Douglas looked up, his fork freezing. His face contorted into indignant outrage. "Excuse me, this is a private area. You cannot just barge in here. I am calling security." "Call them," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "But before they arrive, call your bankruptcy attorney. Because as of 9 o'clock this morning, Apex Health Holdings officially acquired the entire portfolio of bad debt from your primary lender. You owe me $4.2 million, Douglas. I am collecting." He dropped his fork. The clatter against the plate was deafening. "You are that woman from the gala last night, Kiara Marcus. You are out of your mind. I am a sitting city alderman. You cannot intimidate me with corporate shell games." "It is not a game when I hold all the winning pieces," I replied. I opened my designer tote bag, pulled out a thick manila folder, and dropped it right onto his plate, crushing his breakfast. "I spent the entire night tearing through your financial history. You leveraged 3 shell companies to buy commercial real estate on the South Side, failed to develop them, and defaulted on the loans. To cover your tracks, you started selling fake zoning permits and backdated notary stamps to desperate developers. Men exactly like my brother-in-law, Brad Vance." Douglas wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a cloth napkin. His arrogant posture was completely disintegrating. "You have no proof of that. A mismatched notary stamp on one document is a clerical error. It would never hold up in a court of law. The judge will throw it out." "I do not need a judge to ruin you," I said smoothly. "I already initiated foreclosure proceedings on your commercial properties. I drafted a press release detailing your shell companies, which I am prepared to send to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in exactly 5 minutes. Your political career will end before lunchtime. Your assets will be seized by sunset. You will face federal wire fraud charges by Friday." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the patio, as if expecting the FBI to materialize from the golf course. He was a coward who had operated in the shadows for too long, unprepared for a predator who hunted in broad daylight. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a desperate, shaky whisper. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "If you want me to testify that Brad forged the deed to the Cascade Heights property, I will do it. I will tell the court he paid me $10,000 to backdate the stamp. Please call off the foreclosures. Do not release that file. Testifying against Brad is the bare minimum, I told him, tapping my manicured fingernail against the red folder. I do not just want to prove the deed is fake. I want to salt the earth where Brad's company stands. I want every dirty deal you two have orchestrated over the past 5 years. I know you kept receipts, Douglas. Corrupt men never trust each other. You always keep an insurance policy. Douglas closed his eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. The last remaining shred of his political defiance evaporated in the humid morning air. He realized I was not negotiating. I was giving him a single narrow exit from total annihilation. He stood up slowly, his knees visibly trembling, and gestured for me to follow him. We walked in silence away from the patio and down a plush-carpeted hallway leading to the exclusive members-only locker room. Douglas approached a polished oak locker bearing a small brass plate with his name. He dialed lock, his hands shaking so violently it took him 3 attempts to open it. He reached past his golf shoes and pulled out a worn black leather-bound ledger. It looked heavy, ancient, and incredibly dangerous, containing the dark secrets of powerful men. Brad thought he was the genius, Douglas whispered, clutching the book to his chest before handing it over to me. But he was sloppy. He used state grant money intended for minority business development to buy out properties in black neighborhoods, forcing families out through aggressive redlining tactics. He deliberately targeted elderly homeowners, falsified building inspection reports to condemn their houses, and scooped the land up for pennies. Every transaction, every bribe, every forged signature is documented right here. I kept the ledger to protect myself if he ever tried to throw me under the bus. I took the heavy black ledger from his hands, feeling the immense weight of the justice it contained. This was not just evidence of a single forged deed. This was the master key to completely dismantling a racist, exploitative real estate empire. You did the right thing today, Douglas, I said. Do not contact Brad. Do not leave the state. Answer when my lawyers call. I walked out of the country club, with the master ledger safely tucked under my arm, the leather feeling cool. Brad Vance was currently filing an emergency conservatorship motion at the Fulton County Courthouse, thinking he still had a legal maneuver left to play. He had absolutely no idea that I was walking directly into that exact courtroom, carrying the absolute undeniable destruction of his entire miserable life, ready to finally end his reign of terror for good. The heavy mahogany doors of Courtroom 4 at the Fulton County Courthouse loomed ahead of me like the giant, unforgiving gates of judgment. I pushed them open, stepping from the chaotic, echoing hallway into the hushed, deeply serious atmosphere of family court. The air conditioning was freezing, blowing a steady stream of cold air across the wooden pews, but the tension inside the room was boiling hot. I took my seat at the defense table, placing the heavy black leather ledger directly in front of me. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored crimson blazer and folded my hands neatly over the book. Across the center aisle, Brad sat at the petitioner table. He wore a brand-new charcoal suit flanked by 3 men who reeked of expensive cologne and billed by the minute. Vanessa sat directly behind him in the gallery, clutching a designer tissue, performing the role of the deeply distressed, perfectly concerned daughter to absolute perfection. Brad let out a quiet, condescending snort when he saw me sit down completely alone. He leaned over and whispered something to his lead attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Gregory Pierce. Gregory straightened his silk tie, stood up, and approached the judge with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his skin color and expensive law degree guaranteed him absolute victory. He rested his hands on the wooden podium, looking up at the bench with a deeply practiced expression of profound sorrow. Your Honor, we are here today requesting an emergency conservatorship over Mr. Marcus Hayes. Gregory began, his voice dripping with theatrical empathy. My client Bradley Vance is a highly respected real estate developer in the city of Atlanta. He and his wife Vanessa have watched with profound horror as Mr. Hayes has rapidly deteriorated both physically and mentally over the past several months. However, the true tragedy here is not just medical. It is the malicious interference of the respondent, Kiara Marcus. I sat perfectly still. I did not glare. I did not interrupt. I kept my hands folded neatly over the black ledger, letting Gregory dig the trench deeper and wider. Your Honor, Chiara Marcus is a deeply unstable individual. Gregory continued pacing dramatically in front of the judge. She dropped out of nursing school over a decade ago. She has zero financial literacy, no formal education, and a long documented history of erratic behavior within this family. Yesterday, she unlawfully removed her elderly father from an elite secure medical facility, placing his very life in grave danger. She then fabricated an incredibly complex, irrevocable historic trust to illegally siphon off the Cascade Heights estate, an asset my client had already rightfully purchased. Vanessa let out a loud, theatrical sob from the gallery. Brad patted her hand, looking at the judge with a deeply concerned, manufactured expression of grief. It was an absolutely sickening performance. They were using the courtroom to officially paint me as the erratic, uneducated black stereotype they desperately needed me to be. They wanted to strip my father of his basic human rights, simply to line their own pockets and bulldoze our family history. We are asking the court to immediately invalidate this fraudulent trust, Gregory demanded, raising his voice to emphasize his righteous indignation. We ask that you grant full medical and financial conservatorship to Bradley Vance. Mr. Vance has the capital, the corporate infrastructure, and the sheer business acumen required to manage the Hayes estate. Leaving an elderly, confused man in the care of a broke, unemployed college dropout is gross negligence. She simply does not possess the intellectual capacity to understand high-level financial matters. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a completely unreadable expression, adjusted her reading glasses. She looked down at the massive stack of emergency filings Brad had dumped on her desk. She then shifted her gaze directly to me. She noted my calm demeanor, my professional attire, and the thick black ledger resting quietly under my hands. Ms. Marcus, the judge said, her voice cutting through the thick tension in the courtroom. These are incredibly severe allegations. You are currently sitting at the defense table completely unrepresented. In matters involving emergency conservatorships and the contesting of multi-million-dollar trusts, the court strongly advises securing competent legal counsel. Do you intend to represent yourself today? Brad smirked. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He fully expected me to stammer, to cry, or to throw a loud defensive tantrum. He expected an easy, uncontested slaughter. I have excellent legal representation, Your Honor. I replied, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the silent room. They were just finalizing a few supplementary filings with the clerk downstairs. Well, they are cutting it awfully close, Miss Marcus, the judge noted, glancing at the round clock on the wooden wall. I am not going to delay this emergency hearing for a phantom lawyer. If your legal counsel is not present right now, we are proceeding. Your Honor, she is clearly stalling. Gregory interjected quickly, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. She likely hired a cheap public defender or some strip mall attorney who does not even know how to find the courtroom. This is a profound waste of the court's valuable time. Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors at the very back of the massive courtroom swung open with a resounding, authoritative crash. Every single head in the room turned. The arrogant smirk instantly melted right off Brad's face. Gregory stopped pacing, his mouth dropping slightly open. 3 people walked down the center aisle in a perfect synchronized formation. Leading the group was Elias Thorne, the most feared, ruthless corporate litigation attorney in the entire state of Georgia. He charged $2,000 an hour and only represented Fortune 500 companies. Elias Thorne did not just enter a room, he commanded it. His bespoke Italian suit was perfectly tailored, and his presence sucked the oxygen right out of the air. Flanking him were 2 senior partners from his prestigious firm, carrying thick leather briefcases bulging with highly classified legal ammunition. Elias walked straight past the petitioner table, not even glancing at Brad or his suddenly terrified legal team. Elias stopped at my table, offered me a brief, deeply respectful nod, and then turned to face the highly respected judge. Elias Thorne, representing Ms. Chiara Marcus and Apex Health Holdings, Your Honor. Elias announced, his voice vibrating with absolute, undeniable power. We sincerely apologize for the slight delay today. We were busy filing a federal injunction against Mr. Bradley Vance. Gregory physically took a huge step backward, the color completely drained from his face. He looked at Elias Thorne, then looked at me, the terrifying realization finally dawning on him. He had not walked into an easy conservatorship hearing. He had just walked his client into an absolute slaughterhouse. Elias Thorne did not even grant Gregory Pierce the basic courtesy of a single glance. He bypassed the petitioner table completely, his tailored suit shifting flawlessly as he approached the center podium. The entire courtroom, its collective breath. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, sensing the monumental shift in power. Elias unclasped his briefcase, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He withdrew two thick, bound folders and handed them directly to the bailiff to pass up to the bench. "Your Honor." Elias began, his voice carrying the calm, absolute authority of a man who never lost. Opposing counsel has just presented a highly dramatized, entirely fictitious narrative regarding Mr. Marcus Hayes and his medical condition. My team has submitted the certified comprehensive medical evaluations completed just yesterday at Oak Ridge Medical Center. The evaluations were conducted by a board of 3 independent top-tier neurologists and 2 senior cardiologists. I direct your attention to page 4. The judge flipped open the folder, her eyes scanning the crisp pages. "As you can clearly read, Your Honor, Mr. Hayes is in perfect cognitive health," Elias stated, projecting his voice so Vanessa and Brad could hear every single word. "He suffered a minor documented allergic reaction to a newly prescribed blood pressure medication. He does not have dementia. He does not have Alzheimer's disease. He is fully lucid and completely capable of managing his own financial affairs." The only danger Mr. Hayes faced was from Brad, who attempted to terminate his life support against hospital protocol. "Objection!" Gregory shouted, jumping to his feet, his face flushed with panic. "That is a baseless, slanderous accusation." "Overruled." The judge snapped, her eyes narrowing as she read the sworn affidavits from the hospital staff included in the file. She looked down at Brad, her expression turning into a mask of pure judicial ice. "Sit down, counselor. I am reading the sworn testimony of the night shift nurses who explicitly state your client demanded they halt medical care while the patient was recovering." Gregory slowly sank back into his chair. Brad looked like he was going to be physically ill. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale white. Vanessa covered her mouth with her hands, sinking lower into the gallery pew. Elias was just getting started. He reached into his second briefcase and pulled out the heavy black leather-bound ledger I had acquired from the country club. He held it up for the entire courtroom to see. The worn leather cover seemed to absorb the bright overhead lights. The petitioner claims he is a highly successful real estate developer, acting in the best interests of his father. Elias continued, his tone turning dangerously sharp. "This is another easily disproven lie. I am submitting into evidence the master financial ledger of Vance Developments authenticated by a sitting city alderman just this morning. Your Honor, Bradley Vance is entirely bankrupt." Brad leaped out of his chair. "That is stolen property. You cannot use that in this court. She stole that from my office." "Bailiff, if Mr. Vance speaks out of turn one more time, you will physically restrain him and place him in the holding cell," the judge roared, slamming her wooden gavel down with a deafening crack. "Sit down and keep your mouth shut, sir." Brad collapsed into his seat, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. "As I was saying," Elias smoothed his tie, completely unbothered by the outburst. "The ledger details a systemic, massive financial collapse. Mr. Vance has defaulted on his last 4 commercial development loans. To cover his mounting debt, he engaged in aggressive illegal redlining practices. He intentionally targeted historically black neighborhoods, falsified zoning permits, and bribed city officials to condemn properties owned by elderly African American citizens. He swooped in, bought the land for pennies, and planned to build luxury condominiums. When his funding dried up, he realized he needed a massive, immediate cash injection, so he turned his sights on his father." The judge turned the pages of the copied ledger, her jaw clenching tighter with every line she read. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. She was piecing the entire puzzle together in real time. She looked at Brad, recognizing exactly what he was. He was not a concerned, wealthy family man trying to protect an ailing relative. He was a desperate, financially ruined fraud, exploiting an elderly black man's temporary illness to steal his ancestral home and cover up massive federal crimes. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper, you came into my courtroom today asking me to strip a healthy, vibrant man of his basic human rights. You attempted to use the legal system as a weapon to facilitate your own corporate embezzlement. You presented fraudulent claims regarding your own financial stability, and you lied directly to this court about your true motives. Gregory stood up, raising his hands in a desperate gesture of surrender. Your Honor, my firm had absolutely no knowledge of these financial documents or the allegations of fraud. We ask for a brief recess to confer with our client. Request denied, the judge fired back instantly. She picked up her pen, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. There will be no recess, and there will be no conservatorship. I am dismissing this emergency petition in its entirety with prejudice. It will never be filed in this court again. Brad buried his face in his hands. Vanessa let out a loud, genuine sob of absolute despair. They had lost everything. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice echoing with undeniable authority, I am officially revoking Bradley Vance's medical power of attorney over Mr. Marcus Hayes. This court is issuing an immediate order for a forensic audit of Vance developments. I am turning this ledger over to the federal authorities right now to begin a full criminal investigation today. The wooden gavel struck the sound block with a deafening crack. Brad's eyes darted wildly around the room as the absolute finality of the ruling crushed him. Panic overrode his arrogance. He grabbed Vanessa by her trembling arm and dragged her down the center aisle, bursting through the heavy mahogany doors into the crowded courthouse hallway. Reporters from local real estate blogs were already swarming, tipped off by the sudden collapse of the emergency conservatorship hearing. Brad shoved his way past the flashing cameras, ignoring the barrage of shouted questions about his impending federal fraud investigation. He knew his entire corporate empire was bleeding out on the courthouse floor. If investors watched the news and saw the judge's ruling without a manufactured counter-narrative, his remaining funding would evaporate before midnight. He needed to spin the truth on the largest broadcast platform in the city of Atlanta. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Brad had leveraged his last remaining public relations contact to secure an exclusive live interview on Channel 8 News. It was the highest-rated evening broadcast in the state. He planned to use the primetime slot to paint my legitimate legal victory as a malicious, hostile corporate takeover orchestrated by a jealous sibling. I sat in my top-floor executive office sipping a glass of sparkling water, watching the massive flat-screen television mounted on my wall. The local news anchor, a polished woman with a sympathetic smile, introduced the segment as a tragic family dispute threatening urban development. The camera cut to Brad and Vanessa, sitting on a plush studio sofa holding hands tightly, perfectly framed by the warm studio lighting. Brad wore a dark, muted suit, stripped of his usual flashy accessories, projecting the image of a humble, hardworking businessman under siege. Vanessa wore a modest beige dress, her hair pulled back into a simple style. She stared into the camera lens, her eyes brimming with heavily manufactured tears. The anchor leaned forward, adopting a tone of deep, practiced empathy. Bradley, your company has been at the forefront of revitalizing historic neighborhoods. Today, a judge dismissed your petition to protect your ailing father-in-law and ordered a sudden audit of your firm. Can you explain to our viewers what exactly is happening? Brad looked down at his lap, shaking his head with a perfectly timed sigh of exhaustion. It is a complete tragedy, Brad said, his voice thick with fake emotion. My firm, Vance Developments, was on the verge of bringing millions in community investment to Cascade Heights. We wanted to build a future for those residents. But my sister-in-law, Kiara, executed a deeply illegal, hostile takeover. She manipulated my sick father-in-law into signing over his historic estate while he was heavily medicated. She is trying to bankrupt my company simply because she holds a lifelong bitter grudge. The anchor turned her sympathetic gaze toward Vanessa. Vanessa, this must be incredibly difficult for you to watch your sister tear your family apart. Vanessa let out a shuddering, dramatic sob, wiping a perfectly placed tear from her cheek. She clutched Brad's hand, leaning into his shoulder, like a frightened, victimized wife. "It breaks my heart into a million pieces," Vanessa cried, her voice quivering with practiced devastation. "Kiara has always been incredibly troubled. She dropped out of college. She has always resented my success and my happy marriage to Bradley. When our father fell ill, Brad and I just wanted to get him the best possible medical care. We wanted him to be safe and comfortable. But Kiara completely hijacked his medical decisions. She locked us out of the hospital, isolated him from the people who love him, and forged complex legal documents to steal the family land. She does not care about the community or my father. She just wants to destroy my husband's livelihood out of pure jealousy. I just want my dad back, and I want this nightmare to end." It was an absolute masterclass in manipulative tears, weaponized brilliantly by a woman desperate to protect her proximity to corporate power. They were using the public airwaves to actively defame my character, assuming I would cower in the shadows. They thought controlling the immediate media cycle would buy them enough public sympathy to pressure state authorities into delaying the federal audit. They believed they were writing the final draft of the story. The anchor nodded solemnly, offering a comforting smile to the camera. "A truly heartbreaking situation for the Vance family and the future of Cascade Heights. We will continue to follow this developing legal battle. We will be right back after this short commercial break." The news station graphic flashed across the screen, followed by a brief second of absolute blackness. Brad and Vanessa assumed they had just successfully saved their sinking ship. They had no idea I had anticipated this exact public relations maneuver. 3 hours before their interview aired, I had authorized my media acquisition team to purchase the entire 2-minute premium advertising slot immediately following their specific news segment. I paid triple the standard market rate in cash to ensure the network could not refuse. The television screen illuminated, but it did not show a standard advertisement for car insurance or laundry detergent. Instead, the screen displayed the sleek, modern corporate logo of Apex Health Holdings. The camera panned out to reveal me sitting behind my massive mahogany boardroom table, wearing a striking emerald green suit exuding corporate dominance. I stared directly into the high-definition camera, my expression calm, lethal, and uncompromising. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear into thousands of living rooms across the city. "You just heard a compelling emotional story about a hostile corporate takeover. Now allow me to share the undeniable truth." The broadcast cut to a split screen. On the left was my face. On the right, a high-resolution scan of the official federal bankruptcy filing for Vance Developments appeared completely unredacted. "My name is Kiara Marcus, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Health Holdings. Bradley Vance is not a community developer. He is a bankrupt fraud currently under active federal investigation for exploiting elderly homeowners." The split screen captured a moment of absolute unscripted television history. The polished news anchor visibly gasped, her professional composure fracturing as she turned to look at the couple sitting on the studio sofa. Brad stared at the camera monitor, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the inevitable click. Vanessa shrank back into the cushions, her manufactured tears instantly drying up. They were completely paralyzed, trapped on live television with no script, no legal team, and absolutely nowhere to run. "Ms. Marcus," the anchor stammered, pressing a hand to her earpiece, as her producers undoubtedly screamed instructions from the control room. "Are you stating that Vance Developments is currently under federal investigation? We brought Mr. Vance here to discuss a family real estate dispute." "There is no family dispute," I stated firmly, staring directly into the camera lens to ensure every viewer in Atlanta felt the weight of my words. "There is only a desperate criminal attempting to manipulate the media to save his sinking ship. Bradley Vance does not care about urban development or community revitalization. He cares about erasure. For the past 5 years, his firm has systematically targeted historic, predominantly African American neighborhoods. He bribes corrupt city officials to condemn properties owned by elderly black residents, buys the land for pennies on the dollar, and plans to bulldoze our cultural heritage to build overpriced gentrified condominiums. I signaled to my media team off camera. The graphic on the screen shifted from the bankruptcy filing to a highly detailed digital map of Cascade Heights. Red markers highlighted every property Brad had aggressively targeted. My father, Marcus Hayes, refused to sell our family estate. I continued, my voice carrying the righteous fury of an entire community. So Brad attempted a different, much darker strategy. He tried to legally murder him. When my father was admitted to the hospital last week for a minor reaction to medication, Brad and my sister Vanessa illegally ordered the medical staff to halt all life-prolonging measures. They wanted him dead so they could trigger a fraudulent power of attorney and steal the land. "That is a lie!" Brad finally shouted, snapping out of his paralyzed state. He pointed furiously at the studio camera, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "Turn her feet off right now. This is defamation. She is a liar and a completely unstable dropout." Vanessa chimed in, her voice, shrill and desperate, as she grasped for any remaining shred of public sympathy. "Atlanta, please do not listen to her. My sister has always been jealous of me. She is making all of this up because she hates our family." "I anticipated you would say that, Vanessa," I replied smoothly, leaning back in my leather boardroom chair. "Which is exactly why I brought receipts. Let us review the tape." I pressed a button on my desk console. The live news feed immediately cut to a black screen displaying a simple audio waveform graphic. The crisp, undeniable audio from the 6:30 morning phone call began to play loudly across the television broadcast. "Sis, Dad died last night." Vanessa's recorded voice echoed through the studio, sounding callous, cold, and entirely devoid of grief. "He left everything to me and my husband. You get nothing." Then Brad's deep, arrogant chuckle filled the airwaves. "Finally, the broke dropout is out of the picture. I have already called the demolition crew for the house in Cascade Heights. We are tearing that outdated junk down by Monday morning." The broadcast cut back to the studio. The silence was deafening. The anchor stared at Vanessa with open, undisguised disgust. The camera zoomed in tight on Brad, capturing the exact moment his towering, arrogant white privilege completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He could not charm his way out of this. He could not threaten a lawsuit to make the audio recording disappear. The entire city of Atlanta had just heard him laugh about bulldozing a historic black neighborhood hours after he believed his father-in-law had passed away. "As you can clearly hear, Atlanta," I said, breaking the heavy silence. "My sister did not shed a single tear for the father she claimed to love just 5 minutes ago on this very stage. They celebrated his supposed death because it meant a massive payday for Vance Developments. But my father did not die. I legally transferred our ancestral home into an irrevocable historic trust, permanently securing it from their greedy, grasping hands." The public response was instantaneous and catastrophic for Brad. A live social media ticker running along the bottom of the news broadcast began updating at a blinding speed. Viewers were furious. Prominent community leaders, local politicians, and everyday citizens flooded the network with messages of absolute outrage. The narrative had violently flipped. Brad was no longer the handsome, misunderstood developer fighting a hostile corporate takeover. He was exposed as a ruthless, racist predator who preyed on vulnerable black families to line his own pockets. "This interview is over," Brad growled. He ripped the small microphone off his lapel, throwing it aggressively onto the studio coffee table. He grabbed Vanessa by the arm, hoisting her up so roughly she stumbled in her heels. "We are leaving right now." "You can leave the studio, Brad, but you cannot outrun the consequences," I said, my voice echoing from the monitor as he marched toward the exit. "Because your investors are watching this broadcast too." Right on cue, a sharp, piercing ringtone erupted from Brad's jacket pocket. Then another ringtone sounded. Then a rapid, relentless series of notification chimes began going off simultaneously. Brad froze in his tracks, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. The camera captured him staring down at the bright screen. His major corporate investors, the wealthy hedge fund managers who had kept his struggling company afloat, were watching the live television broadcast. They were seeing the federal bankruptcy documents. They were hearing the audio of his blatant elder abuse and racist demolition plans. The text messages and emails were flooding into Brad's phone in real time. They were completely terminating their contracts, pulling their massive financial backing, and actively distancing themselves from his toxic, sinking brand. Funding was evaporating by the millions with every passing second. Brad's phone continued to chime relentlessly, a digital death knell for his entire corrupt empire. The fallout from the live broadcast was instantaneous and devastating. Returning to my Buckhead mansion that evening, local news stations were running the audio recording on a continuous loop. I poured a glass of red wine and stood by the massive windows in my living room, watching headlights pass in the distance. The sharp buzz of my intercom system broke the quiet. My gate guard spoke with an edge of annoyance. He informed me my sister stood at the front gate alone, demanding to enter. She arrived in a ride-share vehicle, having abandoned her husband in the aftermath of their public ruin. I instructed the guard to open the iron gates and escort her to my front porch. I wanted to hear what kind of desperate pitch she had formulated on the car ride over. When I opened my mahogany doors, Vanessa looked nothing like the polished woman who had strutted through the hospital lobby days ago. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and the television makeup had melted into dark streaks under her bloodshot eyes. She stood on my porch, shivering slightly, clutching a manila envelope against her chest. She looked up at me, attempting to mask her features with victimized sorrow. It was the same expression she had utilized on the news, but this time, her audience knew every one of her tricks. I stepped aside, allowing her to cross the threshold into my grand foyer. She immediately dropped her luxury leather handbag onto the floor and completely collapsed onto her knees right in front of me. She wrapped her hands around my ankles, letting out a theatrical sob that echoed off the marble tiles. I did not move to comfort her. I looked down at her head, feeling nothing but a very cold, clinical curiosity. "Kiara, you have to help me," Vanessa cried, her voice echoing with desperation. "Brad is a monster. I never knew he was bankrupt or targeting black neighborhoods. He lied to me about everything. He manipulated me into making those decisions at the hospital." I firmly stepped back, forcing her to release my ankles. I slowly walked into the living room and sat on my sofa, gesturing for her to take the armchair opposite me. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her makeup, and hurried into the room. She sat on the edge of the chair, leaning forward with wide eyes. "I am leaving him, Kiara," she announced breathlessly. "I packed a bag and walked right out of the studio, but all our joint bank accounts are frozen. Federal investigators already raided his corporate office. I have no money, nowhere to stay, and the media is tearing me apart. You are my sister. You have to protect me from him." I took a slow sip of my wine. "You want my protection now?" I asked smoothly. "Yes." Vanessa nodded, gripping the arms of the chair. "I can help you destroy him completely. I know where he keeps his private ledgers. I know the names of the city officials he bribed. I can be your star witness in the federal fraud case. I will testify against him in open court and tell the judge everything. All I need is a small fresh start. Just $2 million and a condo in Los Angeles. It is pocket change for you, Kiara. We can be a real family again. Just pay me, and I will hand you Brad on a silver platter." The sheer audacity of her proposal was breathtaking. She was attempting to sell her own husband out to the federal government in exchange for a luxury lifestyle funded entirely by the sister she had spent her lifetime degrading. "You are truly remarkable, Vanessa," I said, setting my wine glass on the table. "You do not care about justice. You do not care about this family. You only care about loyalty when there is a massive paycheck attached. Now you are betraying him for my wealth." Vanessa's lip trembled. "That is not true. I was a victim of his psychological abuse. I understand exactly what it is like to build my power," I corrected her sharply. "While you were out buying designer bags with Brad's stolen money, I was building a healthcare empire from the ground up. You laughed when I dropped out of nursing school. You mocked me for years because I refused to conform to your shallow worldview. I am not giving you a single dime. You made your bed with a racist fraud, and now you are going to lie in it while the federal government seizes every asset you possess." The manufactured sadness instantly evaporated from Vanessa's tear-stained face. The weeping sister routine vanished, replaced by a hard, bitter glare. She realized her emotional manipulation was useless against me. She stood up from the armchair, her posture rigid with sudden aggressive defiance. She picked up the manila envelope she had carried into my home and slammed it firmly onto my coffee table. "I knew you would be a stubborn, selfish bitch," Vanessa hissed, her true personality rising to the surface. "You always think you are so much smarter than everyone else. But Brad warned me you might try to cut me out. He told me to secure an insurance policy just in case you refused to play ball, because he knew you lacked real family loyalty." She ripped open the flap of the manila envelope and aggressively pulled out dense financial spreadsheets stamped with the official logo of my corporate accounting firm. "You want to talk about fraud, Kiara? Let us talk about Apex Health Holdings. Brad hired a private hacker to bypass your corporate servers yesterday morning. We have your highly confidential internal tax documents. We know exactly how you structure your acquisitions to avoid paying state taxes. If you do not wire $5 million in cash into my untraceable offshore account by tomorrow morning, I am taking this entire unredacted folder directly to the federal agents at the Internal Revenue Service." I stared down at the crisp spreadsheets spilling across my custom coffee table. The official logo of my corporate accounting firm was indeed printed clearly at the top of each page. Vanessa stood over me, panting slightly, her eyes wide with the manic energy of a cornered animal who suddenly believed she had found a loaded weapon. She genuinely thought she possessed the ultimate leverage to extort $5 million from me. I did not flinch. I did not scramble to snatch the documents away from her grasping hands. Instead, I slowly reached out, picked up the top sheet of paper, and adjusted my posture. I read the numbers, the structural breakdowns, and the acquisition tax strategies, printed in neat, aggressive columns. A quiet, genuine laugh escaped my lips, vibrating through the tense silence of my living room. Vanessa slammed her hand against the arm of the chair. "Are you actually laughing right now? Did you not hear a single word I just said? This is a massive federal crime. Kiara Brad paid a fortune to get his hands on these files. If the Internal Revenue Service sees how you shelter your corporate assets to avoid paying state taxes, they will freeze your accounts just like they froze ours. You will lose your entire medical empire by Friday. You will be completely ruined." "You and Brad are a perfect match," I replied, tossing the paper back onto the table. "You both possess an incredible talent for speaking confidently about things you do not understand. You just paid a hacker a fortune to steal documents that are completely legally compliant and entirely useless." "That is a lie," Vanessa screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the spreadsheets. "Brad's accountants reviewed them. They said you used blind trusts to bypass millions in capital gains taxes. They said you are a criminal." "Brad's accountants are currently under federal investigation for wire fraud," I reminded her sharply. "Perhaps their legal interpretations are not the gold standard. Furthermore, you did not uncover a secret tax evasion ring, Vanessa. You uncovered a standard, heavily regulated corporate restructuring plan. When I acquired the Oak Ridge Medical Network, I utilized legal tax deferment strategies, actively encouraged by the state, to promote healthcare expansion. Every single document sitting on this table was already submitted, reviewed, and officially approved by the state tax board 3 weeks ago. You are literally trying to blackmail me with public records." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Her aggressive, victorious posture crumbled as the reality of her profound stupidity washed over her. She had banked her entire future on a stolen file she did not even comprehend. The silence was heavy. "I am not like you, Vanessa," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "I did not cheat my way to the top. I did not forge my report cards in high school, and I did not pay someone to take my college entrance exams so I could maintain the illusion of being the smart, successful daughter. I built my empire with my own 2 hands. Do you really think a Black woman in the corporate healthcare sector could acquire $1 billion portfolio without the federal government heavily scrutinizing every single penny I operate with absolute flawless transparency, because I know exactly how many people are waiting for me to make a mistake? I never cut corners, I never break the law, and I certainly do not leave leverage lying around for a desperate parasitic sister to use against me." Vanessa stared at the papers, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her final desperate extortion attempt had failed spectacularly. She had burned her bridge with Brad, She had permanently alienated our father, and now her last remaining lifeline had just evaporated into thin air. She sank back into the armchair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with genuine despair. "What am I supposed to do?" she sobbed, the manipulative edge entirely gone, replaced by raw, pathetic desperation. "I have absolutely nothing left, Kiara. I cannot go back to him. The media is parked outside our house. My friends are not answering my calls. You cannot just leave me with nothing." "You left me with nothing when I was 21. I stated, completely devoid of sympathy. "You poisoned this family against me. You mocked my struggles and actively tried to destroy my relationship with our father. You made your choices, Vanessa. You chose to marry a racist fraud because you loved his money more than you loved your own family. You abandoned your own blood for a luxury lifestyle. Now you get to experience exactly what happens when the money runs out." "Please," she begged, looking up with mascara-stained cheeks. "Just give me 50,000, just enough to disappear and start over somewhere new." "I am not giving you a single cent," I said, standing up from the sofa. "You are going to walk out my front door, and you are going to face the consequences of the life you chose to build." Before Vanessa could launch into another hysterical plea, a sharp, distinct notification chime echoed through the silent living room. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated with a high-priority alert from my lead financial acquisitions director. I opened the encrypted message, my eyes scanning the brief, highly anticipated text. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. Vanessa looked up at me, sensing the monumental shift in my demeanor. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling with fresh panic. "What did you just do?" "I did not do anything," I replied, turning the screen toward her so she could read the glowing text. "The federal government did. Brad's massive pile of toxic commercial debt just triggered an automatic default. His entire corporate portfolio has officially gone into foreclosure. The public auction for Vance Developments has just begun. His total ruin is now fully underway." "Get out of my house, Vanessa!" I commanded, pulling my eyes away from the glowing screen of my sleek smartphone. The notification detailing the active foreclosure auction of Vance Developments was the final devastating nail in her husband's corporate coffin. Vanessa stared at the digital alert, her jaw trembling as the last ounce of her manufactured defiance evaporated into thin air. She did not scream or throw another tantrum. The harsh, brutal reality of absolute financial ruin had finally paralyzed her completely. I signaled to my security detail waiting in the foyer. Two armed guards stepped into the living room, gripping Vanessa by her elbows and guiding her toward the front doors. She dragged her feet across the polished marble tiles, weeping silently into her shaking hands. I did not waste another second watching her pathetic exit. I grabbed my heavy crimson designer trench coat and instructed my private driver to take me straight to the Fulton County Financial District. Brad was currently standing in the private auction halls of the Commercial Lending Board, desperately trying to salvage his rapidly imploding empire before the clock ran out. When my Maybach pulled up to the heavily guarded Financial Exchange building, the humid Atlanta air was thick with corporate anxiety. I walked through the revolving glass doors and flashed my platinum acquisition credentials to the armed guards. They immediately escorted me up to the VIP viewing gallery, overlooking the massive main auction floor. Below me, the scene was absolute chaos. Brad was pacing frantically near the back exit, his expensive suit wrinkled and drenched in nervous sweat. He had his mobile phone pressed tightly to his ear, arguing aggressively and loudly with someone on the other end of the secure line. My private investigator had already briefed me on Brad's current strategy. Because every legitimate bank in the state had completely frozen his business accounts following the federal fraud broadcast, Brad was attempting to secure a last-minute high-interest bridge loan from an underground syndicate of unregulated private lenders. These were ruthless, shadowy, dangerous figures who preyed on desperate commercial developers and operated far outside the bounds of traditional corporate law. They were dangerous loan sharks disguised as venture capitalists, and they did not play nice. Brad gestured wildly with his free right hand, his loud voice echoing up to the quiet gallery. "I am Bradley Vance. I have built over half the luxury properties in this entire city. You know my portfolio is solid. I just need 10 million in liquid cash right now to halt the auction block. I will give you a guaranteed 40% return by next quarter. He was using the exact same arrogant, entitled tone he always used when bullying local zoning officials. He genuinely and foolishly believed his white skin and legacy country club memberships would automatically grant him an extension and a free pass. He was accustomed to a world where his mere presence commanded respect and infinite second chances. But the underground financial world did not care about country club pedigrees, generational wealth, or racial privilege. They only cared about liquid collateral, and Brad had absolutely none left to offer. I watched as Brad pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the blank screen in pure horror. The shady lenders had hung up on him. His aggressive demands had completely alienated the only criminals willing to answer his calls. His privilege had utterly failed him when he needed it most, leaving him completely exposed in a brutal shark tank he did not understand. The head auctioneer stepped up to the heavy wooden podium at the center of the trading floor. He tapped a heavy brass gavel against a wooden-sounding block, demanding immediate silence from the frantic developers and corporate scavengers in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we are opening the floor for the immediate wholesale liquidation of Vance Developments, the auctioneer announced, reading from a thick legal binder. All corporate assets pending commercial leases and outstanding toxic debt portfolios are being sold as a single indivisible lot. The opening bid to satisfy the primary creditors is set at $12 million. Brad suddenly rushed forward, pushing his way through the dense crowd of wealthy investors. He looked around wildly, desperately hoping one of his former wealthy country club buddies would raise a bidding paddle to bail him out. He made direct eye contact with 3 different men he had golfed with just last month. Every single one of them immediately looked away, flatly refusing to acknowledge his miserable existence. He was a toxic liability now, and absolutely no one was going to risk federal criminal scrutiny to save a sinking fraud. "Do we have a starting bid of $12 million?" the auctioneer asked, his booming voice echoing through the silent, unforgiving room. Going once, going twice. Brad closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in total, unadulterated defeat. He had no money, no allies, and absolutely no escape route left to run down. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, slamming the brass gavel down with a resounding final crack. "The entire portfolio of Vance Developments is officially sold to the anonymous private buyer holding proxy paddle number 7. Brad snapped his eyes open. He whipped his head around, frantically scanning the heavily crowded room to see exactly who had just purchased his entire life's work for pennies on the literal dollar. He desperately needed to know who owned him. I slowly walked down the carpeted staircase from the VIP gallery, stepping directly onto the main auction floor. The crowd naturally parted for me, their eyes fixed on my tailored crimson suit. I walked straight up to Brad, holding the brightly numbered proxy paddle firmly in my right hand. I stopped just inches from his sweating, utterly terrified face. "You were looking for the anonymous buyer, Brad?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the silent trading floor. "I just bought your entire company, your toxic debt, and your freedom." The morning sunlight glared aggressively off the glass facade of the Vance Developments corporate headquarters, located right in the heart of the Atlanta financial district. I stepped out of my Maybach, the crisp Georgia air wrapping around my tailored charcoal suit. 2 heavily armed private security guards flanked me immediately, their posture radiating absolute, uncompromising authority. I did not just win the secret financial auction. I officially acquired the entire physical building containing Brad's rapidly sinking empire. I possessed the legal deed, the master keys, and the absolute power to completely obliterate his professional existence. I walked through the revolving glass doors, completely ignoring the confused receptionist who scrambled to ask for my identification. I did not slow my pace. I marched straight to the private executive elevator, scanning my newly activated biometric access card. The heavy metal doors slid shut with a satisfying final click, carrying me directly to the top floor where Brad had built his throne of lies. The elevator doors parted to reveal a sprawling, open-concept office buzzing with frantic, panicked energy. Dozens of employees were glued to their computer monitors, watching the financial news feeds, declaring the sudden, catastrophic bankruptcy of their employer. When I stepped onto the plush carpet, the entire floor went dead silent. Typewriters stopped clacking. Phones stopped ringing. Every single eye locked onto me and the two massive guards standing firmly behind my shoulders. I walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the floorboards, creating a rhythmic countdown to Brad's total destruction. I approached the frosted glass doors of the primary executive suite and pushed them open without knocking. Brad was standing behind his massive oak desk, violently sweeping stacks of files into an open briefcase. He looked completely unhinged, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night of abject terror. He froze when he saw me standing in his doorway. The heavy leather briefcase slipped from his trembling hands, hitting the floor with a loud, pathetic thud. "What the hell are you doing in my office, Kiara?" Brad screamed, his voice cracking with pure, desperate rage. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "I told security to ban you from this building. You cannot just barge in here. I will have you arrested for corporate trespassing." I did not flinch. I slowly reached into my designer tote bag, pulling out a thick, legally binding document stamped with the official seal of the State Financial Exchange Board. I tossed it effortlessly onto his desk, the paper landing right on top of his expensive monogrammed desk pad. "You really need to start reading the fine print, Brad," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the open office door so his entire staff could hear every single word. "I am not trespassing. I am conducting an inspection of my new property." As of 9 o'clock this morning, Apex Health Holdings officially acquired Vance Developments, all its outstanding commercial debt, and the absolute ownership rights to this exact building. I bought your entire miserable life for pennies on the dollar. Brad stared at the document, his face draining of all remaining color. He leaned over the desk, his eyes frantically scanning the official legal signatures and the undeniable transfer of power. He realized he was no longer the CEO. He was just a pathetic bankrupt squatter occupying an office that now belonged to the black woman he had spent a decade humiliating. "No," Brad whispered, shaking his head violently as his fragile ego completely shattered. "No, this is impossible. You cannot buy my company. You are a dropout. You do not have the capital to execute a hostile takeover. This is a forged document. You forged this just like you forged the trust." "I do not forge anything," I corrected him sharply, stepping closer to his desk. "I simply capitalize on the profound, breathtaking stupidity of arrogant men who think white privilege can substitute for actual business acumen. You thought you could steal my father's ancestral land to cover up your massive federal wire fraud. Instead, you handed me the exact leverage I needed to completely destroy you." I snapped my fingers. One of my security guards stepped forward carrying a standard cheap cardboard box. He placed it roughly onto the center of Brad's desk. "You are officially fired, Brad," I announced, projecting my voice to ensure the employees outside heard the final verdict. "You are stripped of all corporate titles, all access to company funds, and all privileges within this building. You have exactly 2 minutes to put your personal items into that cardboard box and vacate my property. Leave the corporate laptop. Leave the company phone. Take your pathetic pride and get out." Brad let out a primal, guttural roar of pure, unadulterated fury. The mask of the sophisticated, wealthy developer completely disintegrated, leaving only a violent, cornered animal. He lunged across the wide oak desk, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. He intended to physically assault me right there in the executive suite. He never even made it halfway across the polished wood. My two security guards moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. They intercepted him in midair, slamming his body face first onto the desk with a deafening crash. One guard pinned Brad's arm painfully behind his back, while the other held his shoulders firmly against the wood. Brad thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities, his face pressed awkwardly against the glass surface of the desk. "Get off me!" Brad roared, struggling uselessly against the overwhelming physical force of the highly trained guards. "I will kill you, Kiara. I will destroy your entire family. You cannot take my company, it is mine." "It was yours," I corrected him, looking down at his pathetic, struggling form with absolute freezing contempt. "But you lost it the moment you decided to target my father. Now you are going to walk out of my building in total disgrace. and you are going to face the absolute ruin you spent 5 years building. Suddenly, the sharp, authoritative sound of heavy boots echoed from the main office floor. The frantic whispers of the employees outside instantly ceased. I turned around to look through the open doorway. 6 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow FBI lettering emblazoned across the back marched briskly through the office. They moved with absolute synchronized purpose, heading straight for the executive suite. The lead agent, a tall woman with a severe expression, pulled a thick document from her jacket pocket. She stepped into the office, looking directly at the man pinned to the desk. "Bradley Vance!" the federal agent announced, her voice slicing through his frantic screams. "You are under arrest for massive federal wire fraud, systemic elder financial abuse, and criminal corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Brad stared blankly at the federal agent, incapable of processing his own destruction. He puffed out his chest, attempting to invoke his final shreds of societal privilege. "You cannot do this to me," Brad demanded, his voice trembling. "I am a prominent developer. I golf with the mayor. This is a misunderstanding orchestrated by this woman." The lead FBI agent did not blink. She unclipped heavy steel handcuffs from her belt, stepping directly into his personal space. "Your golf buddies are not going to save you, Mr. Vance. They handed us your financial ledgers to secure their own immunity." She forcefully grabbed his arms, snapping the cold steel securely around his wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly like a gunshot through the silent executive suite. Federal agents swarmed the office, confiscating the hard drives Brad had desperately tried to pack away. 2 agents marched Brad toward the glass doors, parroting him right through the center of his office. His former employees watched with absolute satisfaction as their tyrannical boss was publicly humiliated and dragged toward the freight elevators. I watched him go, feeling the crushing weight of his toxic reign finally lift from my family's shoulders. I took the private executive elevator down to the main ground floor lobby. My father was waiting near the reception desk, flanked by my personal security team. He looked incredibly strong, a proud patriarch reclaiming his space. Vanessa was standing near the revolving glass doors, her designer clothes disheveled, frantically trying to hail a rideshare on her phone. She froze when the freight elevator dinged loudly and opened. She watched in horror as federal agents marched her handcuffed husband across the marble floor. Brad did not even look at her. He kept his head down, consumed by his ruin. Vanessa dropped her expensive smartphone. It shattered against the hard stone. She spun around, her tear-filled eyes locking onto me and our father. She ran toward us, throwing herself onto her knees, inches from my father's polished shoes. "Dad, please!" Vanessa wailed, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "I had no idea he was doing this. He manipulated me. You have to help me pay for a lawyer. I am your daughter." My father looked down at her, his face devoid of the warmth he had given her for 35 years. "You are not my daughter." He stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble, leaving no room for negotiation. "My daughter would never have plotted to stick me in a state facility to steal the home my grandfather built. You chose your side. Now you will live with the absolute emptiness of that choice." He turned his back on her, linking his arm through mine. As we walked out the front doors, Vanessa sobbing on the floor, we were intercepted by a small crowd near my parked Maybach. Aunt Shirley and Uncle Thomas stood on the sidewalk holding a bouquet of expensive flowers, looking ashamed. The news of Brad's federal indictment had already hit the broadcasts. They rushed forward, their faces painted with manufactured remorse. "Kiara," Aunt Shirley started, her voice shaking. "We were so wrong. We let Brad's money blind us. We should never have called you a dropout. We always knew you had a brilliant mind." I did not reach out to take the bouquet. I looked at the family members who had spent decades praising Vanessa's proximity to white wealth while treating my existence like a shameful secret. "You do not respect my mind, Aunt Shirley," I said smoothly, stepping past her outstretched hands. "You only respect my bank account. You treated me like a failure when you thought I was broke, and you only came to apologize when you realized I hold the keys to the castle. I forgive you, but you will never have a seat at my table again." I left them standing on the sidewalk, their hollow apologies dissolving into the humid Atlanta air. Over the next 6 months, the scope of my victory materialized into reality. I finalized the acquisition of Vance Development's assets, immediately halting every gentrification project Brad had initiated. The eviction notices he had issued to elderly Black residents across the city were voided and thrown into the shredder. I redirected millions of dollars in corporate funding to restore the historic Cascade Heights neighborhood. We repaired the crumbling sidewalks, updated the community centers, and provided grants to legacy minority-owned businesses that Brad had tried to destroy. I did not just save my father's estate, I secured the cultural and financial legacy of an entire community. My healthcare empire continued to expand, operating with a philanthropic mission to protect the people Brad tried to displace. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of the Cascade Heights estate. The historic home gleamed with a fresh coat of white paint, the original oak columns restored. The neighborhood echoed with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting across their fences. My father stepped out onto the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade. He looked out over the lawn, his chest swelling with pride. He was a self-made man who had built a life through resilience, and he was finally standing on untouchable ground. "You did it, Kiara," my father said softly, raising his glass in a toast. "You protected our bloodline, and you destroyed the enemies who tried to erase us." I smiled, clinking my cold glass against his. I had spent my youth being underestimated, labeled as a dropout, and dismissed by the people who should have protected me. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They mistook my silence for weakness. They assumed my refusal to play their toxic games meant I was losing. They never understood that while they were busy seeking validation, I was methodically building an empire. True lasting power simply waits for the perfect moment to strike, takes back what rightfully belongs to it, and ensures the people who tried to break you are forced to watch you thrive forever.